I keep trying, man. I keep trying to fall back in love with this franchise in a cinematic form. It's very, very much a holdover of a early 2000s ideology of how to make a comic book movie. We've seen comic book movies grow and change so much since then, and yet here's another sequel or prequel or anti-prequel sequel to I believe this is like the 7th or 8th or even 9th if you count the Wolverine movies, X-Men film. And this one is, I've described it as, it's not a bad movie, it's not a good movie, it's just a movie that exists. That's all it is. And I don't know why. I don't know what they're doing with these characters. Nothing really major happens in this film. So much goes wrong in this film to the point where they actually forget the ending of the previous film to create it. They add new characters like Jubilee, who you've wanted to see for the longest time. She's wearing her iconic yellow jacket, and she doesn't say a word in the film.
Yeah, just like her role in X2.
Yeah. Psylocke is in this movie. They don't give her much to do. Apocalypse is in this movie. His characteristics and powers are sort of undefined. That scene right there where you actually see him big fighting is a dream sequence. So there's
spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. I'm sorry.
Wow.
There's a lot of problems with this movie, but it's not just this movie. It's this franchise, and I think this franchise needs fixing. It needs a reboot.
It needs a reboot.
It needs to be removed from the hands of the people involved.
Toyed with the idea. They ended Days of Future Past with this sort of weird soft reset.
Yeah.
And then they keep going back to it. We just heard that Patrick Stewart is going to show up in the Wolverine 3.
Yep.
Just reboot it. It's okay if you keep Hugh Jackman. I love Hugh Jackman. I think he's a great Wolverine. But just reboot it. Just clean the slate. Just start over. Sometimes you have to do that. You know, Fantastic Four maybe didn't work. Give it a shot. Just try it with X-Men.
No, Max, that's easier said than done. Obviously, you're one of the biggest X-Men fans I know.
When I heard that they were making an X-Men movie set in the 1980s, I was simultaneously heartbroken and sort of very cautiously excited. And I haven't seen this movie, and I won't see this movie. 80s X-Men, the Chris Claremont run, like all that stuff is like it's my favorite. I love it. I love it to death, and it just breaks my heart that this movie just kind of ham-fistedly goes about it. They don't care. You go by billboards and it's like it's Apocalypse choking Mystique, and it's like, oh, you put that poster up there because Oscar Isaac and Jennifer Lawrence are hot right now. Like they just are putting the actors. It reminds me a lot of the Resident Evil franchise, which totally deviated from anything that was Resident Evil pretty early on. And some people like those movies, and that's cool. But like, if you took the name off of it, would you identify that as being set in this universe?
So I think one of the major problems with the X-Men films is that they're very similar. Have you heard the Sonic cycle? So Sonic the Hedgehog games get announced, people get really excited, we find out more about them, people get a little less excited, we finally play them and we're like, that was bad, and then the cycle repeats.
Yeah.
And I feel like the X-Men, they're kind of in the same way where going into this one, we were like, they're doing the 90s costumes, they're doing a live action version of the animated series. Even we saw like the Ivan Ooze Purple Apocalypse thing, which was a running joke before that movie. Guess what? Having seen the Power Rangers film and having seen X-Men Apocalypse, those characters have the exact same origin story and arc. It's ridiculous. They literally do. It's a guy that like is buried in sand that gets up, gets a crack team of bad dudes together to fight the good dudes, and then whatever happens, happens. Literally the same character.
So I mean, it sucks that like the X-Men movies that they haven't really. I feel like they haven't really done a whole lot with the X-Men just kind of being. Like, they're supposed to be outcasts. They're supposed to be kind of like villains.
I agree.
And they spend so much of the time just treating them like action figures and throwing them at superheroes and stuff. But, like, X2 was so great because there's that whole scene where there's, like, the shootout and all the cops come out and, like, Wolverine gets shot in the head and he's like, these aren't knives, they're stuck to my hands, you know? And I love that kind of stuff, and I love that they used to play with, like, the whole kind of the mutant oppression thing, and it's like, there's elements of it, but it's not really a core thing, and they're rushing to get to the big money shot stuff.
It's why I liked a lot of First Class as well, because it actually, like, at least grabbed the style and kind of exuded it a little bit.
First Class should have been a reboot. They could have done it there. The Wolverine, this one, I don't even understand it. The Wolverine was the second Wolverine movie. They were basically pretending the first one didn't happen because that was a nightmare. The second one could have been great. They had an ace in the hole. All they had to do was loosely adapt Frank Miller and Chris Claremont's Wolverine standalone story where he goes to Japan and fights some ninjas. Instead, they open it up with a flashback to X-Men 3 with Famke Janssen showing up on screen as the Phoenix, reminding us that, oh right, They had Brett Ratner directing that one movie. It wasn't very good. Let's bring people back to that. Why not just scrap it? Just start fresh.
So I don't think this franchise is in a bad place because it's in a post-Avengers world. I think that's helping the fact that for all comic book movies. I think it's in a bad place because it's in a post-Deadpool world.
Yeah.
Deadpool's probably the best X-Men movie, and I never thought I'd be saying that in 2016.
No, they get Colossus. They don't just make him this dude who shows up for 30 seconds. I mean, they've got Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Here are 2 comics I recommend reading if you want to check out X-Men. First, New X-Men, Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely. This is fantastic. This came out right after the X-Men movies came out, and if you get this particular version of the trade paperback, it comes with this thing called the Morrison Manifesto, which is basically the pitch that Morrison gave, where he's pretty much like, let's make X-Men cool, let's make an X-Men comic that's kind of a reboot in the comic sense, but it doesn't try to operate like, oh, nobody knows who the X-Men are, let's sell it to them. It's like, people care about the X-Men. There's a line in here where he pretty much is like, let's just go back to the core stuff. Grab this and read this. And then, of course, speaking of Avengers, Joss Whedon did an incredible run. Astonishing X-Men, Volume 1. He did the first 4 volumes, and they're fantastic. You might have to read a little bit back into the new X-Men lines to make more sense of it.